Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on how to perform a regression in Excel. All of the details related to the regression and the statistical background was all discussed in lab, and its ecological significance was also discussed in lab, so I'm not going to get into that in this video tutorial. This is just a demonstration of the mechanics as how to perform a regression in Excel with our data. Now, the very first thing you want to make sure of is that the data analysis tool pack is installed on your computer. Now, if you go to the data ribbon and you don't see this, where my cursor is kind of hovering over here, do not panic. All you do is go up to the file ribbon, and then you want to click options, select add-ins, and you'll notice that for my computer here, the analysis tool pack is an active application. If it's not, then the analysis tool pack will be among the choices here under inactive application add-ins. So you just left click it to turn it blue, and you make sure that Excel add-ins is enabled down here, and you click go, and then the little pop-up window is going to come here, and you want to click analysis tool pack. Make sure that checkbox is clicked. Don't worry about these other things. Click OK, and when you do that, data analysis will then become available on your Excel program forever. Alright, so now that we've gotten that cleared up, very important first step, let's take a look at the assignment. So here it is. So calculate a new variable C to N for each sample. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. I want to point out a typo here. Now, these graph titles is something that I wish to discuss a little further here. There's actually a mistake here in these titles. Usually, when the word versus appears in the title of a graph, it almost always means Y versus X. It's just a convention. However, it makes a lot more sense to have organic matter and nitrogen as the X variable, because as organic matter is broken down in the decompositional process, these other compounds and substances, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, are liberated. So then organic matter becomes a substance known as humus, which is a stable substance that remains in this form for literally thousands of years through a process known as humification. But anyway, that's beside the point. Just know that organic matter is your X variable and nitrogen is also your X variable, so just be aware of that when you make your graphs and you perform the linear regression. Okay? So, back to the data. Now, I would create a new tab. I just called it linreg. And that is where we're going to put all of our linear regression outputs under one tab. We're also going to put all of our graphs under one tab, just to make everything nice and neat for printing purposes. So the very first regression we'd like to perform is organic matter versus carbon. Organic matter being the X variable and carbon being the Y variable. So to perform any regression in Excel, we click the data analysis button up here, and we want to choose among all of these choices here regression. You'll also notice that Excel has quite a few pretty powerful analysis tools already built in, a couple of which we've actually used already. The ANOVA is something that we're going to get to a little bit later in the semester. So we want regression for the purposes of this data. So click OK, and Excel asks you for the Y range first, or the dependent variable is always asked first. So in our case, the Y variable will be carbon. So with the little blinking cursor in that box where it says input Y range, I want to left click and select my entire carbon range here all the way down the column. Now I'm going to left click where it says input X range, which of course is our X variable, and that will be organic matter. Remember, organic matter will be the X variable for all of these tests and for the graphs as well. Alright, so that is all selected all the way down. Now, don't worry about these other things here, labels, confidence level, all that kind of stuff. Just leave all that stuff alone. The only thing we are going to change, though, is output range. So I'm going to left click that, and make sure that you also left click inside of the box that's next to it. Otherwise it's going to magically have your cursor appear up here at the Y range. We don't want that. We already set those parameters, so we want to keep those. So we want to just have the blinker in here. So we want the output of this test, and it's going to be in the form of a table. We want this under our linreg tab here. So if you left click in the first box up there, notice that it creates a reference, a cell reference in the other worksheet. So the linreg worksheet, cell A1, and it's an absolute reference indicated by those dollar signs. So click OK, and it performs the linear regression rather quickly. Let's zoom this up just a bit so we can see better. Alrighty. So here's all of our parameters for the linear regression. Now again, the significance of all of these numbers was discussed in lab, so I'm not going to get into it here just for the sake of brevity. So you already know how to interpret these numbers. Also check the handout as well for a good discussion of that. Now increase the width of some of these columns just so you could see things a little bit better, because you're actually going to be printing this out. So we also want a graph to complement this linear regression for organic matter and carbon. So here's what we're going to do. Let's left click and drag both organic matter and carbon, both of those columns. And when you do that, by default, the leftmost column is always going to be your X, and anything to the right of your first column are going to be your Y variables. In this case, carbon is our only one. So we're going to want to choose Insert and a Scatter Graph, and we want data points, no lines, just markers. So there it is. And some cleaning up is in order here. Get rid of those grid lines. You don't need the series legend here because there's only one variable, so we don't need that. Another thing I wish to do is to center these data points a little bit better so they're not kind of floating up here in space. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this Y-axis a bit, and I'm going to have my minimum at about 2 here, because notice my data starts, well, a little bit more than 2. So if I right click on the Y-axis and choose Format Axis, for my minimum fixed, I want that to be 2 is a reasonable minimum. And notice when you do that how the graph adjusts. So that looks much better. Let's also trim this X-axis as well. So if I right click and format the X-axis, notice that my data starts at about 4, a little bit more than 4. So I'm going to set my minimum at 4. And another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the order of these numbers on the X-axis, simply because, don't forget, the X-axis and the Y-axis for that matter are given in grams. Organic matter loses weight as it decays, so it makes more sense to have the higher variables going from higher to lower. It just makes more intuitive sense when you're reading the graph from left to right to have your higher numbers going from higher to lower. So values in reverse order for the X-axis, and it flips the Y-axis to the other side, which is okay. There's really nothing you could really do about that in Excel. It's just a little quirk. And there is a very lovely graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut this graph. So you could do Control X, or you could just right click and select Cut. And I want to put that under my linear regression tab here. And I want to have that kind of nestled next to my linear regression. So I'm going to click a cell up here, and that's where I'm going to drop the graph right next to it. Just like that. You could cover up this lower and upper confidence level stuff if you want to. I'll just reveal it. Just if you wanted to see the confidence interval at 95%, you could do that. So let's actually zoom this down just a bit so we could see everything a little bit better. Awesome. So that looks perfect. So here's how we prepare the graph. Now again, the significance of what we're seeing here was discussed in lab, so I'm not going to get into it now. Let's actually give this graph a trend line. So if I right click any of these data points and we get the pop-up window here, one of the options is add trend line. And the kind of trend line that we're going to add is a linear one. By default it usually chooses a linear one. And don't worry about these other parameters, but down here select Display Equation on Chart, display R squared